Hi, everybody. We still have some folks joining, but I think we are going to get underway. Inés, if I can, you should be able to keep admitting people as they're joining the waiting room. So if you wouldn't mind taking over that, that would be great.
We'll do that.
And yeah, we'll get things underway. So welcome everybody who is joining us to PFC's webinar Wednesday for April 8th. Today, the topic of discussion is cybersecurity and you, working from home edition. My name is Jonathan. I cover the IT needs for the organizations at Foundation House, primarily reporting to CERIC, the Counseling Foundation of Canada, Lawson Foundation, and Lane Law Foundation. I also do IT consulting for nonprofits and small business. So I've been asked to present today on the cybersecurity threats your organization might face, and I've based my presentations on a series of talks I gave recently at Foundation House. I've covered topics that will help you both while working from home and when you return to the office. Please post your questions in the chat as they come up, and we'll be monitoring them, and I'll cover them to the best of my ability at the end of the presentation. Alors, bonjour tout le monde, je m'appelle Jonathan et je suis l'administrateur système chez Foundation House. Merci de vous joindre à nous aujourd'hui. Unfortunately, that is the only French I'll be speaking today, but I'll let Inés proceed from here.
Thank you, Jonathan. Merci beaucoup. Bonjour à toutes et à tous et bienvenue à notre édition spéciale sur la cybersécurité, surtout en ces temps de télétravail un peu forcés. Nous avons fait appel à Jonathan donc, pour nous aider à concocter un petit webinaire sur le sujet. I am Ina Shalala, the Learning and Partnerships Director of PFC, based in Montreal. For those non-members joining us, PFC is a network of grant makers all across Canada. We'd love to hear from you. Following the presentation of Jonathan, we'll have some time dedicated to Q&As. You can send us these questions at any time, en français or in English. And I will be monitoring the French questions in particular, en français. Donc, je ferai part des questions en français à Jonathan sans problème. Just to let you know that a recorded version of this webinar will be available as well as the slides of the presentation, both in English and French after the webinar. And we will also be sending you a post-webinar survey to gather some feedback from participants. Nous allons envoyer un petit sondage à la fin du webinaire pour rassembler un peu les retours de nos participants. C'est quelque chose qui est très important pour nous pour toujours améliorer nos webinaires. Et voilà, je vous souhaite un grand bienvenue. And Jonathan, I give you the floor. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, so a quick overview. Bear with me one moment. The items to cover today. We'll talk about cloud hosting at your organization and the various forms that takes. Data backup of your computer. We'll talk about email security, especially in regards to phishing attempts at your organization. Some suggested antivirus software that you can use. We'll talk about password management, both for yourself and again across your organization. Wi-Fi and networking while you're working from home. We'll talk about your operating systems that you'll be using and updates to them. We'll talk about disk encryption as well as physical security of your devices. So to start things off with our beautiful star wipe here to Charlton Heston in Planet of the Apes 1968, asking us, where's the data? In this film, Charlton Heston's character, Colonel Taylor, is told, the question isn't so much where we are, it's when we are. Well, we know when we are, of course, but where is our organization's data being stored? And where exactly is the cloud? So to talk about that a bit, let's think about our email and data cloud hosting. It's good to identify what email service you use, whether that's Google for Business, Microsoft Office 365, or another, as well as what cloud storage service or services you might be using. That can look like Dropbox, Google's Google Drive, or others. If you're unsure of the cloud service you use, how you access your email is usually a good clue. So for example, if you go to gmail.com for your email, your organization is likely using Google. Often you use all the available products from a cloud service. So in this example, you probably also use Google Docs for file creation, and Google Drive for cloud storage. If you use Outlook and Office.com for your email, you likely use Microsoft Office 365 products and therefore Microsoft OneDrive for your cloud storage. There's also services like Dropbox and Box that are sometimes used instead of or in addition to your organization's cloud storage host, as these are less platform specific. And again, if you use Dropbox, that's usually pretty obvious by accessing dropbox.com and using the Dropbox app. For the cloud hosting of your website will almost always be hosted separately from whoever's hosting your email. To find out where your website is hosted, it's best to figure out where you log in to update your website. So if you log into your website via youraddress.org/wpadmin, then you're using WordPress. If, for example, you log into your website via squarespace.com, then yeah, you guessed it, you use Squarespace for your hosting. There is a resource slide at the end of this presentation to help with identifying your hosting service or services, and a take-home worksheet will be provided as well to help with that. So let's talk about minimizing risk for your cloud hosting providers, now that you have a better sense of where your data is stored. WordPress and other website builders offer the ability to have many users with varying permissions. You should generally have 2 administrator accounts for your WordPress or website builder, but all your other staff members should have fewer abilities. So for example, you can allow staff members to create WordPress posts, but not necessarily to delete them or to add WordPress plugins or other things that could cause damage. To speak to the second point on the slide, it's best practice to register for services like your domain name provider, so for example, GoDaddy or Namecheap, with a general organization email like info@yourorganization, so that any renewal notices or other alerts go to an address that all your staff can easily access. A general organization email also won't be deleted like a staff member's might be when they leave your organization. So again, you won't be missing any important alerts. For the third point, you've probably received a 2-factor verification code at some point. But if you're not familiar with the security feature, which is now widely offered, including on Google and Microsoft Office 365, 2-factor verification allows you to set a trusted phone number in addition to your password. So that phone number will receive a unique code anytime your email and password are used to try to log into a new device. So even if your password is compromised or guessed by an attacker, the attacker cannot sign in to access your data without that code. Finally, for the last point, download local copies of your cloud data when possible. In other words, you want to save your data to your device in addition to the cloud. That way, if your cloud service provider experiences an outage or a failure, you can recover your data easily. The desktop applications for Google's G Drive, Microsoft OneDrive, Dropbox, Apple iCloud Drive, and many others offer this ability. Following on that, we'll talk about data backups. So creating documents within your cloud service is always ideal, but what about the other documents that you might create locally on your computer or even other downloads like PDFs? The ability to restore files via Google Drive is great, but it can be time-consuming to re-download documents one by one. This is where a backup app comes in handy because it can allow automated downloading of the contents of an entire hard drive, especially in the case of a lost or stolen device or a failed hard drive. Cloud backup apps like Backblaze work in addition, not separately, from your cloud service and back up all user data automatically and frequently. We've just talked a whole lot about the cloud, so let's go over some terminology. With a cloud service, if I create a document on my iPad and then I later change it and delete it from my Mac, that document is also deleted on my iPad. The deletions propagate. With a cloud backup app, like Backblaze, for example, it keeps that document for me even after deleting it from any of my devices, and even often sometimes offers version control. So even if I haven't deleted the document, I can revert to an earlier version of it. This also brings up what I call the FedEx Solution, and I have another great animated slide for you to enjoy here. So cloud backup apps are great, but cloud backups can get very big since they're backing up the contents of your computer hard drive. These can be hundreds of gigabytes, and this can cause issues with downloading the entire contents of a failed hard drive or the hard drive of a lost or stolen device. Fortunately, many services offer mailing a hard drive with your data to you, which in many cases can happen overnight via FedEx, while the equivalent download of that data could take days or even weeks, especially when you're working from home on a potentially slower residential connection. The inverse is often also possible. Initial backups of your computer can be quite large, and so that initial backup can be mailed as what's called a seed drive to cloud backup providers like Backblaze to minimize what's uploaded over your home internet connection. We're now going to move on from the cloud and talk about email security, along with some nice drop-down examples here, including at the lower right, an example that I actually received myself. We've been seeing more and more cases of easily identified but hard to block phishing attempts like the ones featured here. The domain that an attacker sends from is often easy to spot as being outside of your organization, assuming you're looking. If you aren't looking, or if your email client isn't displaying the from email address and only showing the name, the email can appear to have arrived from your CEO, your president, etc. The email domains that are used are often Gmail, Hotmail, Yahoo, etc., that offer free signups. And these domains cannot be blocked on a large scale without blocking the entire domain itself, which is not desirable, as you likely have stakeholders, clients, or even personal contacts that use these domains as well. And blocking that domain would block those messages that you want. Fortunately, there's a quick fix for this that I've tried to highlight it with these two banners. Google's G Suite, Microsoft Office 365, and others offer the ability to append or prepend messages sent to your domain with a banner based on the sender's email address. For example, at CEREC, we incorporated one such banner to the end of our emails that we receive, allowing us to quickly identify when a message isn't from a CEREC or other trusted domain. That's the pink example at the bottom on the screen in front of you. The yellow banner in the email at the top was in an email I received recently, where the person that I was emailing had a similar setup at their organization. Let's talk about some safe practices for potentially viewing these emails. We're already starting to see a rise of attempts like the examples on this screen due to the coronavirus work from home flatten the curve efforts. And vigilance is key to stopping this threat. In many cases, hackers have found that social engineering, like using a throwaway email with the display name of your CEO, is faster than creating a virus. So here's the same spam email on both my Mac at the left and my iPhone on the right, both running Outlook, claiming to be from the CEO of the Lawson Foundation, who I obviously email frequently. On the Mac at left, the sender's email is displayed by default, but it's not on my phone. But to check, you can just tap the sender's name. Fortunately, I have my banner indicated at the bottom, displayed on both devices, as that banner is added to all of my organization's incoming emails. So I've highlighted a few other giveaways on this email that you'll see. Other giveaways would be the sent from iPhone signature, which Marcel does not normally use. Also, the default signature is actually sent from my iPhone. This example just says sent from iPhone. Minor errors like that can give away an otherwise convincing email, and they're good things to watch out for. So now that you've received a suspicious email, message, or even a warning within your browser, what do you do? No or little interaction with this message is obviously preferred. But if you open one of these messages, how should you mitigate risk? Malwarebytes is an application that's free to download on any of your devices. And I encourage you to try it out after the webinar ends, and a link is provided in our resource slide. Malwarebytes is a lightweight cross-platform application, so that's Windows, Mac OS, and on mobile, that can run constantly in the background or as needed if you've followed a suspicious message or a link and you're worried. So we're going to move on to password management. Here's a comic from a series that I like called XKCD. So this strip is highlighting the sort of absurdity of passwords that are easy for computers to guess, but also hard for humans to remember. So of course, many websites do require numbers, capitals, and special characters, but a key phrase like the one that's indicated here is much easier to remember than a word, like in the top example with troubadour, where letters have been replaced by numbers or other characters. Hopefully that's a fun example of this, and I'll just leave it up for a moment. So once you've developed a strong key phrase to use, what about storing your passwords? Memorization is great, but how do you keep track of dozens of passwords without repeating them? That's where lockers like the services LastPass and OnePass come in really handy. Organizations can use these lockers to share login credentials without necessarily sharing a password between staff members. The password remains obfuscated, but is still entered and can be used to log in. This allows you to finally get rid of the not very secure sticky note or notebook page with all your scribbled down passwords. To follow on that, one hack you've likely heard of in recent years is databases being exposed of many major companies. You've likely received a spam email and been shocked to see it includes a password that you recognize. This is because a service you use, like Dropbox, Equifax, and Yahoo, for example, was hacked while you had an account with them, and your password was exposed. If you use that email and password combination elsewhere, other services you use are also at risk. So again, the idea behind these lockers is to create one strong password for the locker, which then begins recording any existing passwords to your services and can also generate you strong new passwords. I'll also note that 1Password, which I've mentioned here, is offering a free 1-year subscription for families or teams of up to 5. And the link for that is included at the resource slide at the end of this. So you can even get started with one of these programs for free. For Wi-Fi and network security at the home, there's a few things to cover. Most households will have home internet, but some condos and apartment buildings have shared connections. When you are working from a private home internet connection, it's still best practice to have a password-protected wireless network, which most providers will now guide you through when you set up. If you're in a condo or an apartment with a shared wireless or wired network, it's best practice to purchase a VPN subscription to be confident that your device is secure. You've probably heard of VPN, but just to go over what that is, it's a virtual private network that gives you online privacy and anonymity by creating a private network from a public internet connection. VPNs mask your internet protocol IP address, so your online actions are virtually untraceable. Most importantly, VPN services establish secure and encrypted connections to provide greater privacy than even a secured wireless network. One thing that I'll note here is that VPNs are typically device specific. Connecting on your laptop will not secure your smartphone's connection and vice versa. So that's just one thing to remember. Now that we're seeing a spike in home internet use and long distance communication on video calls and the like, all networks and services are being strained by the increase in traffic. You may have seen that Netflix and YouTube have imposed streaming quality restrictions, for example. If you're finding you have frequent connection issues at home, it's worth considering using a wired Ethernet connection to your laptop or your desktop computer and disabling video for your video calls whenever possible and choosing audio only. So we're going to talk about the 2 major operating systems. You are probably staring at one of those operating systems right now, whether that's macOS or Windows. Apple's macOS operating system typically receives security updates for 3 years from the release date of each major version, and macOS receives a new major version every year and is always a free upgrade, which is a good way of encouraging installation. Microsoft Windows 10 is the current version of Windows and is receiving regular updates. While Microsoft is not as active with major Windows versions, their support does last far longer. Windows 7 support ended on January 14th of this year, and Windows 7 received support for 10 years. That being said, if you have any instances of Windows 7 at home or even when you're back at the office, these should be updated to Windows 10 so that new security patches can be installed. Following on that, we'll talk about disk encryption on your computer. Password protecting your computer is a good start, but without an encrypted disk, most computers are at risk of data theft if physical access to the computer is gained. Obviously, this is more of a concern once we're back at the office, once we're working from a co-working space, a coffee shop, but it's always worth having this discussion. As well, many computers, including both desktops and laptops, can be physically opened easily and have the hard drive removed and placed in an enclosure, and can have data compromised without logging in with your password whatsoever. The solution to that is disk encryption, and both major operating systems offer their own built-in disk encryption. On the Mac, that's called File Vault, and on Windows, that's called BitLocker. When I previously offered this session at Foundation House, I did a demo where I was able to copy a 1.5 gigabyte file in about 15 seconds from an unencrypted computer. To put that size in context, the documents folder on the computer I'm presenting today from is 11 gigabytes. So this could easily be copied during a bathroom break if my computer was unlocked. To lock your screen if you're leaving your computer unattended, you can do it really quickly on both operating systems with the 2 keyboard shortcuts that I have listed. On Windows, that's hitting the Windows key and L, and on a Mac, you hit Control, Command, Q to quickly lock the computer to your password screen. I promise I'm not trying to be too doom and gloom here, but even if your device is encrypted, it can still be a theft risk, and replacement is expensive to you and your organization. Fortunately, many PCs offer locking slots, and the company Kensington offers solutions for both Windows and Mac computers to lock them. If you're not familiar, a lock slot is a physical slot on your computer that connects to a cable lock so you can tether your computer to your desk or to somewhere that you're working. If you don't have a locking slot or a locking solution, a locking file cabinet is always a good way that may be available to quickly and safely store your laptop. So hopefully I haven't been rushing things too much here, but for my last slide, I thought that we would talk a bit about the Zoom platform because it has been getting a lot of publicity, not all of it good, in the last few weeks as we've been working from home. Obviously, this webinar is being delivered on Zoom, but what are the privacy implications for these Zoom video calls? Zoom does have a history of being fast to respond to security flaws. And speaking to the second point on the slide, they worked directly with Apple on the webcam flaw that I've described last summer that changed the dangerous code that was involved and modified Zoom's access to the computer's webcam. If you're using Zoom meetings, a simple fix for stopping unwanted access to your Zoom call is to add a password and a waiting room to your meeting, which can be added when you're creating the meeting or edited afterwards, if you'd like to add that extra security. It's also important to keep both the Zoom app and your operating system security up to date by installing the recommended patches from Zoom, Windows, and Apple. To follow along with the third point here, Zoom has been staying on top of security issues that are being raised by the tech community and have recently decided to freeze any new feature releases for the next 90 days. And they're instead focusing on trust, safety, and privacy issues on the Zoom platform. That being said, other audio and video platforms do exist as well, of course. Google offers both Hangouts and Duo. WhatsApp and Facebook Messenger are available from Facebook. There's Slack, Apple's FaceTime, Skype and Teams from Microsoft, and Discord is available as well. So obviously a multitude of options are available for your team. So thanks for sitting through this so far. And again, hopefully I haven't rushed anything too much. I'm going to start going over your questions in the chat box. So if you think of any now, feel free to ask them and I'll try to start going through things. While I start having a look, I'm going to bring up the first of my 2 resource slides. These are some tools for helping you identify your, yes, you are going to be sent a copy of these slides. I just saw a question pop up to answer that. So the first of these 3 points on the resource slide helps you identify your organization's domain host, which we talked about in the first few slides. The second point is talking about adding a banner to your incoming emails. So you can identify those phishing attempts really easily. These two are for adding the banner to Microsoft Office 365 accounts and to Google accounts, if your organization is using one of the two. The last link on the page is to a neat service called haveibeenpwned.com. This website came about after what was at the time the largest ever single breach of customer accounts, which happened to Adobe. All the data on that website comes from breaches, where data was exposed to people that should not have the ability to view it. And that may actually help you identify if you received one of those scary messages that included a password of yours. It's probably listed on this website along with your email. I'm going to leave this resource slide up for now, and I'm just going to jump into the chat and start having a look at some of the questions. So the first question is about saving passwords to the Google Chrome via the browser. I'm guessing it's not very safe, but it's so convenient. I don't know that it's entirely unsafe to store your passwords directly to Google Chrome. In that scenario, it's worth noting that almost always those passwords are also being saved to your Google account. You'll probably see that notice when you're about saving them to your Google account when you elect to save them. That being said, because those are all either saved directly to your computer or to your Google account, I think a password manager is still a better way of saving those passwords, because the password managers are more multi-platform than your Google account would be. So I wouldn't necessarily say don't save passwords to Chrome, but I would say if you're considering that, I would say if you're considering saving them to Chrome, to instead just start using a password manager like 1Password. And again, what better time to start using 1Password than now, when you can get a 1-year subscription to it. Before I go to any other questions, I'll just skip to my second resource slide. That includes the 1Password promotion and some other helpful links for you directly to some of the services that I mentioned. The bottom link is the link to the free 1-year 1Password promotion that I mentioned. It's a long link, so if you just Google 1Password and Canva, C-A-N-V-A, you'll find that and be able to sign up.
Jonathan?
Yep.
Just one question about the different resources that you're sharing with us today. Are they free, or do we need to subscribe in any way? And are the free versions, if they exist, good enough, or do you recommend us actually subscribing and paying for the service?
That is a good question, and not something that I've highlighted here. Some of these are free, some of these are paid. Sorry to skip backwards for a second. All of the services listed on this resource slide are free. Looking up who your domain host is freely available information. Adding the banner to your incoming emails is a free thing to do. You don't have to pay Google or Microsoft extra for that. And Have I Been Pwned is a free online database to access. I think I mentioned it earlier, but just to reiterate, Malwarebytes does have both free and paid tiers. The major distinction between the free and paid tiers is that the free version of Malwarebytes, regardless of platform, has to be run manually. So you as the user have to be remembering to do that. The paid version of Malwarebytes does have the option to run constantly, so that provides some added security for you. Mm-hmm. Backblaze and other cloud backup products are not free. A company somewhere has to be paying for servers to host your data, so those are not going to be free. That being said, a backup option that I actually didn't suggest in my slides, but is another option to do in addition to a cloud backup service, is built into your operating system. On your Mac, that service is called Time Machine. On Windows, the service is called Backup and Restore. Again, those are built into your operating system, so they're free, and all they require is an external hard drive to back up to. I've used both of those on both of the operating systems. I find they both work really well. All they basically require is you keeping your external hard drive plugged in, or plugging it in from time to time, and they will provide an alert if your backup's out of date. But those are solutions that I recommend using in addition to a cloud backup software. The reason being that in the case of, unfortunately, a catastrophe at home, if your computer and your external hard drive are at home, and say, for example, there is a robbery or a fire, and those two items are destroyed, both your backups are gone, and that's why you want to also be using a cloud backup product like Backblaze.
Excellent, thanks.
To follow, oh, sorry, yep.
Well, no, you can go ahead. I just had a question that I received in private that I wanted to share with you, but you can go ahead and let me know when you're ready.
Yeah, so I was just going to cover for the VPN services that I've listed here. Those are, again, both paid VPN products. With that being said, one thing that I will add when we send these slides out to everybody is that the web browser Opera, which probably some folks are familiar with, actually recently started adding a built-in VPN service to the browser, which is actually really nifty. It's not necessarily as full-featured as a paid product, but it is a really good way where, right now when we're mostly working from home off of a secure private network and don't need a VPN, we don't really need to be paying for a VPN product. But once we're at some point more out and about in the world, and you, again, still don't always need a VPN, a free service like the Opera browser might be a really good way of using a VPN for free.
Great.
So yeah, if you want to go ahead with your question, that would be great.
Yes. So we did get a question about SharePoint. A lot of our organizations actually use SharePoint to manage their files and documents. And so the question is, if data is all on SharePoint, do we need to back up SharePoint? In theory, no. In practice, yes. The reason, for those who aren't familiar, SharePoint is cloud data hosting from Microsoft, and in some ways is kind of the predecessor of Microsoft OneDrive. In a lot of ways, though, it's more powerful than OneDrive, which is why it's still, in a lot of cases, heavily used. I would say the only case of data failure for SharePoint would be some kind of catastrophic failure or attack on Microsoft. And that is where, on one of my earlier minimizing risk slides, I talked about this a bit, where keeping local backups of your data is best practice whenever possible. For those familiar with it, SharePoint is generally pretty heavily accessed through a web browser, but there are ways on Windows to manually back up your SharePoint data. And for one organization that I work with, I actually was able to, using Microsoft Windows, fully download all of their SharePoint data and migrate all of it to OneDrive. And that organization also uses Backblaze. So that's how they're keeping multiple copies of all their data. So hopefully that answers the SharePoint question. Yes, thank you. I do see another question. If I'll share it with you, and you can perhaps provide us some insight. There are two questions that are sort of related, and they mention VPNs. And so the first one is, my organization's VPN makes my internet connection and opening any file very slow. Is there a way around that, or do I just have to be patient? And the second one is, we are all working remotely with VPN. Sorry, I lost the question. Oh, but from VPN, but are thinking of heading to Google Docs to more easily share and work on files. We can access all files now. It's just slower. Is it safer to remain on VPN?
I'd have to know a little bit more about your organization setup, but from the sounds of it, you're likely using the VPN to access your organization's more locally hosted data, which is, I would say, a perfectly viable way of doing it with the cost of a slower connection due to VPN, which is one of the drawbacks that you will experience while using a VPN product, which is, to put it very simply, because your data is being protected more. That added protection is in turn making your connection a little bit slower, is the simplest way of thinking about it. With that being said, I think it is worth considering moving to a cloud service like Google Docs. But if you were to do that and are using an existing VPN product, the major thing I would say is making sure that two-factor verification is turned on for all of your users when they're accessing Google Docs to help add a level of security there and stop any attackers. So hopefully that helps a little bit there, because I know that it sounds like a few people have been complaining about the speed of VPNs, and it is the big drawback to that service. Yeah,
exactly. So there's another question on the online meeting platforms, webinars such as Zoom, WebEx, GoToMeeting. Do you have any recommendations as to which one to choose, considering what happens, the whole story behind Zoom lately?
Yep.
Do you have any preferred method?
So one of my organizations, we've actually started using Slack for both audio and video calls pretty heavily. Slack is also a very popular office messaging platform, and I would say has definitely also, usage has been on the rise since we've all been working from home as well. So if your organization is not as comfortable using Zoom, or is not using Zoom at all, Slack is a platform worth considering. You might even already be using Slack. My organization, we already were, but we weren't really leveraging the audio and video calls, which are a big part of it. We have been more, and it's been working great for us. That being said, if your organization is using Google for Business, as we discussed throughout the presentation, Google Hangouts and Google Duo are really good systems to be using. And if your organization is on Microsoft Office 365, it's worth checking out Skype, which is also has been around for ages and is multi-platform, or Microsoft Teams. Microsoft has really been pushing really hard lately and adding a lot of features too. So it just goes to more what platform your organization is using for their cloud service and their cloud email hosting. But Slack, Skype, and Google Hangouts would be my top suggestions for alternate platforms.
Great.
The drawback to, for example, like Apple FaceTime, is it is Apple only. A person on their Mac cannot FaceTime somebody on a Windows PC.
Right. Thank you. So I have another question here. Is Google Drive safe? All our documents are stored in the cloud and are regularly backed up on a physical hard drive.
Yes, that is, I love that. That is like the ideal use case for backing up. The sort of tech community rule of thumb for your data is, if you only have one copy of your data, you don't have a copy of your data, right? Mm. If you are working off of your computer exclusively and you have no backup software, if your computer crashes, that data is potentially gone forever, or you're looking at potentially thousands of dollars in paying a professional data recovery, which is not ideal. To go over my resource slide here, Backblaze is $60 US per year for unlimited backup for one user. So that cost, if you have a larger organization, may not be feasible, but for smaller organizations is really worth that peace of mind of knowing that a cloud provider has a reliable copy of your data. And again, you want to, whenever possible, be using that in addition to a cloud syncing service like Google Drive. But it sounds like from that question, which I think I can also see here, it sounds like you are both automatically copying your files to Google Drive on the cloud and manually downloading those to a physical hard drive. That's ideal. Again, I love that. Good work.
And is that like, how do you actually do that? Do you need to do that every time you save a document, or do you back up on a regular basis on the hard drive locally?
That they would probably be doing that just on manually on a regular basis, especially with Google Drive. But I mentioned earlier the desktop applications for all of these products. So backup and sync from Google is the desktop application. That's sort of the desktop version of Google Drive. That software allows you to store your Google Docs files locally on your hard drive. Mm-hmm. And then if you're also using a service like Backblaze, you're getting a third copy of your data. So two different cloud providers have a copy, and your own local computer has a copy of that. If you want to take that another step further, if you have a Mac and you're also using Time Machine, you hopefully have 4 copies of that data. And the chances of all 4 of those copies failing simultaneously are obviously extremely low, because they're all being saved differently. So something like that would be an ideal use case.
Yeah, I think I have a lot of work to do after this webinar.
Yeah.
It's a lot of things to think about. So another question is about mail merge services. Someone is asking, they used yet another mail merge. I'm not familiar with that. Once or twice, and sometime after, we noticed some phishing emails were sent using one of our email accounts. Do you have an insight about the safety of mail merge services?
I'll be honest, my knowledge of this is not huge. I guess I would be curious. I'm definitely not familiar with that particular product, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. But I guess I would be curious about, is this product yet another mail merge? Is it requiring your full email credentials to operate? It sounds like it may have been, and that could have been what happened. As we were talking about in the slide about hacking and accessing the database of companies that have been compromised, it's also entirely feasible that you used yet another mail merge. At some point, it all worked fine, and then that company was later hacked, and their database of customer email and passwords were exposed. And if you also used, if that was your email password, then it's totally feasible that somebody got your password that way. But I'm just not familiar with that particular product to answer definitively. I think as a general statement, mail merge services are safe to use, and just, get an idea of the product you're using, get an idea of what credentials they require for you to use them, and just how long the company's been operating is all good information to have.
Yeah. Well, the person actually does confirm that they did ask for the emails to be able to use the service. So
that's not necessarily a red flag on its own, but that definitely could be how something was leaked.
Right. So we have a colleague here asking for recommendations to back up SharePoint, and also should we be backing up Salesforce data?
Yes. In general, I know that Salesforce does offer data export tools. I don't know that that's a particular part of the platform. I believe you can just do that through your administrator settings on Salesforce. So again, that is good data to have on hand. Another thing to think about with really any service like this is, in a lot of cases, it's bigger targets that are being that are being attacked rather than, you know, smaller organizations. So it's totally conceivable that Salesforce could be attacked on a large scale, and there's several different attack forms that could take. And, you know, if you're then experiencing potentially an extended outage of your of the Salesforce platform, an export of that data is really good to have on hand, even if it's just Excel spreadsheets or CSV files, so that you can have a copy of that you're potentially working from and even using with a different provider. Having worked with the export feature on Salesforce a little bit in the past, I do believe they offer an automation for that. So you can set that to be daily, weekly, or monthly to have download links sent to you of your Salesforce data. I think I covered it already, but the SharePoint data can be a little more difficult to download. But just accessing SharePoint through a browser, there are options to download your data. And it's definitely good to, even if you're doing it manually, do that. If your organization still uses SharePoint heavily or exclusively, at least every month, if not on a weekly or bi-weekly basis, I would say. And yes, so that ability is built into the SharePoint through the browser.
Great. Thanks. So I have a question actually. So a few days ago, I was checking our PFC Facebook page, and I realized that someone had created additional PFC pages, and I'm wondering if it's related to the fact that we're now connecting to our Facebook account with our computers from home. Is there a way that, you know, the security was a little bit less robust, and so it allowed for people to create these copies of our page? It
is feasible, and with most of the ways, at least that I'm aware of, that Facebook allows page creation now, it's almost always tied to an individual's Facebook account.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot necessarily make just a Facebook page for your organization without it being linked to basically, you know, Jonathan's personal Facebook account. And
right.
If my personal Facebook account's password is password1234, somebody getting into my Facebook account then has access to potentially modify, delete, or, you know, otherwise tamper with my organization's Facebook related pages. And, you know, that is really going to those, in some cases, socially engineered messages, or even recycling passwords between different services. You know, I could have the strongest password in the world, but not be using a password manager and just recycle my password everywhere. If I, you know, have that written on a sticky note on the lid of my laptop, and, you know, I walk away from my laptop in a coffee shop, somebody
Mm-hmm.
can easily copy that down and have access to a lot of stuff that I don't want them to have access to.
Right.
So that's where starting to use a password manager, a password locker, comes in really handy. And then even using that password manager to generate new secure passwords for all of your existing platforms is really crucial.
Right. Thank you. I think we've covered most of the questions, or actually all of them, at least from my side.
Great. I'm just going through them as well.
Yeah.
So it looks like Steve had a question. When you say you are working remotely on VPN, are you connecting to your organization's network from home and then accessing your files like that? Lori looks like she responded yes to that. But a VPN, that is definitely one use case for VPN. But in some cases, a VPN is not accessing your files on your organization's network, but it's accessing files securely on your organization's cloud service. So VPNs are good for both of that. Cisco is a popular VPN that's typically used for your organization's network. The ones here on my resource slide are more general VPNs that are meant for both consumers and for larger organizations. So hopefully that answers that. And then, yeah, I think that brings us all up to date, like you said.
Yes, I think we haven't received any questions in French. So I would encourage that. We still have a couple of, let's say 3-4 minutes.
And while we are waiting for, oops, I went ahead. I'll just go back to my first resources slide, just in case any folks were looking at that. To clarify as well, if you're adding those banners to your email, you can make the message say whatever you want it to say. You can color code it so it matches your logo. They are really, really nifty visual warnings to be adding, but generally you want them in like a brighter color like pink or yellow, so that it's really obvious to your staff what they're looking at and that it doesn't blend in with signature blocks and that kind of thing.
Okay, I think they're ready to go and make all the changes that you've suggested.
Perfect.
It's a little bit overwhelming, I have to say, Jonathan, because we realize now that you know what we were taking for granted while working from an office, we need to think about right now again and really reinforce the security from our homes. So it's a bit of a challenge.
Yeah. And I mean, like, you know, as I said at one point in the presentation, hopefully this isn't overwhelming, but as I also said, these are not things to stop doing necessarily once we're back at the office. This is, a lot of this is just general best practice. And, you know, I would say if anything, just working from home brings it up more. Right. But, you know, using a password manager is handy in general. And I have a lot of folks who I now have using a password manager of some kind, and they just absolutely swear by them now. A lot of it is, you know, sometimes a bit of work to start using some of these products that we've been discussing, but then once you start using them, you can't imagine not using them, which I think goes for a lot of things and just helps your security overall quite a lot.
Yeah, the famous learning curve. All
Absolutely.
Right. Yeah. So I think I think we have no more questions. Any final thoughts, Jonathan, before we close the webinar?
No. Again, thank you for joining, and hopefully this has been helpful to everybody. I think we pretty much exactly hit our time here. And as we've said, we have the slides will be available, so you'll have access directly to those resource slides. And we do have kind of like a worksheet for you to fill out if you want, just for yourself, not to send us, so that both you and potentially the rest of the staff in your organization are all on the same page about what different cloud providers you're using, what password managers you might be using, backup services, all that kind of thing. That will all be sent out, and I'll just coordinate that with PFC.
Great. Thank you so much, Jonathan. It was really informative, very helpful, especially also your insight and the resources that are on the decks that we will be sharing in the follow-up email, as Jonathan just mentioned, in English and French, because we have also translated the presentation in French. We will also be sharing the recording of this session. I just wanted to thank you all for participating and wanted to let you know that we do have what we now call Webinar Wednesdays every week at 2 p.m. So stay tuned for our upcoming webinars. You will be getting additional information through our weekly digest or on our website. And please do not hesitate to provide us any feedback to continually improve our learning opportunities and sessions. Thank you so much. Thank you, Jonathan.
Everyone.
Bye.
Bye.